So now let us get started with the frog's brain. So I told you that the frog's brain consists of three parts, that is the forebrain, midbrain and the hindbrain. So let us get started with the forebrain. The forebrain consists of the olfactory lobe, and each olfactory lobe is separated from the other by means of a dorsal groove, a longitudinal groove. And the olfactory lobe also has a ventricle inside. Ventricle is basically a cavity within the brain. And olfactory lobe is concerned with the sense of smell or olfaction. Following the olfactory lobe are a pair of cerebral hemispheres. And each cerebral hemisphere is separated from the olfactory lobe by a transverse groove. A longitudinal groove separates the cerebral hemispheres. The cerebral hemispheres also have a cavity inside, which is known as the cerebral cavity or the lateral cavity or lateral ventricle. And within the lateral ventricle are certain thickenings which are referred to as the corpus striatum, and these can be observed in the ventral view. The cerebral hemisphere opens into the diencephalon by the foramen of Monro, which is a tiny passage between the cerebral hemispheres and diencephalon. Diencephalon is a rhomboid structure, and it also has a cavity inside, that is the diocele. The diocele, the floor of the diocele is called as the hypothalamus, and the roof is called as the epithalamus. So the hypothalamus is slightly more thickened than the epithalamus. And the dorsal part of the diocele has an anterior choroid plexus. On the dorsal side of the diencephalon, the pineal stalk is present, but the pineal body is present between the eyes, and it is a vestigial organ. And in the ventral view, you can see the pituitary. And pituitary is a master endocrine gland. Thus, the diencephalon not only controls sight, but also maintains a hormonal balance by way of these different endocrine glands. The next part are the optic lobes, which constitute the midbrain. Now this is also referred to as corpora bigemina. It has a cavity inside, which is the optocele, and the optic lobes communicate with the medulla oblongata by the iter, which is a tiny passage of the ventricle. And there are two types of nerve fibers here. The longitudinal fibers connect the diencephalon with the medulla oblongata, and these are referred to as a crura cerebri, whereas a transverse band of fibers connects the two optic lobes. The optic lobes are basically concerned with sight, that is, detection of visual patterns like shapes, colors, etc. Next part that we study is the hindbrain. So the hindbrain consists of the first part, which is the cerebellum, which is like a transverse patch. And this also has a ventricle inside and is concerned with coordination of muscular movement and balance. Following the cerebellum is the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata also has a ventricle inside, and that is referred to as the metacele. And the dorsal part of the metacele has rich vascularization and constitutes the posterior choroid plexus. Involuntary actions are controlled by the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata continues backwards as the spinal cord, and the metacele continues as the central canal of the spinal cord. Apart from this, we also need to understand that the brain is covered by means of two meninges, or the covers. So the inner one is called as the pia mater, and the outer one is called as the dura mater. Between pia mater and the dura mater, there is a space, that is the subdural space, and between the dura mater and the skull is also a space which is known as the epidural space. So both these spaces are filled up by the cerebrospinal fluid, and this basically helps to minimize the shocks which a brain may receive in case of accidents, etc. I'll just show you a diagram of the ventricles, and here you can see the different ventricles. First is the olfactory ventricle, and then the lateral ventricles of the cerebral hemispheres, and the foramen of Monro, by which the lateral ventricles open into the diencephalon. Then comes the diocele, or the diencephalon's cavity ventricle. Next, the optocele. Optocele opens by means of the iter into the metacele, and the metacele continues backwards at the central canal. So this is all about the frog's brain, and in the next class we will try to understand the spinal cord.